on that trip, a couple folks from American Public Media reached out to me. We had a nice conversation. 3 months later, I was invited to apply for a position, and 3 months after that, I packed a U-Haul and moved to Minnesota. So since I've been here, I've been the host and producer of the nationally syndicated Music Through the Night. And as Damien already mentioned, I am the host and producer, co-host and producer, and co-producer of a podcast called Trilloquy. I think my co-host Scott is here in the chat, so shout out to him, and thanks again for having me, Damien.
Thanks, Garrett. Next, I would like to introduce someone who I am getting to know a little better. I met Jannina at the Sphinx conference back in, what was that, February? And Jannina is a musician, a composer. She's a member of PubliQuartet. And Jannina, why don't you tell us a little bit more about the work that you do?
Hi, everybody. Well, I have to say I'm really honored to be on this panel with so many people I admire, and to celebrate this holiday with you guys. A mentor of mine, Leslie Dunner, who's now at Interlochen, and he was one of my first sort of Black mentors. He conducted the Detroit Symphony for a while, and he conducted my youth orchestra. And when I made my debut with the Detroit Symphony, he conducted. And he had first educated me about Juneteenth. So I connected to him, and I'm thinking of him today as somebody who's just been such a mentor to so many young people. So I'm a violinist and composer. I'm based in Brooklyn now, but I grew up in Detroit, and I'm very much still part of the music scene there. My dad is a jazz guitarist and composer, Spencer Bearfield, very active in the avant-garde jazz scene, and that's really shaped a lot of my thought process and creativity as a musician. My ensemble, PubliQuartet, is contemporary string quartet, whatever that means. I think our mission really is to challenge perspectives with our programming. We bring a lot of different genres to the classical stage. We do a lot of improvisation, and we generally just like to just shake up people's perceptions of what a classical group should look like and sound like in the 21st century. So myself, I also really love to use my creativity to provoke thought, my music to provoke thought. I've been really inspired by works by Black composers for quite some time, and really, as outside of the quartet, that's been a huge focus of what I enjoy to play. And yeah, just happy to be here.
Thanks, Jannina. And last but not least is PaviElle French. PaviElle is a composer, amazing vocalist, and band leader. She's from St. Paul here, Rondo neighborhood, which if you're coming in from outside the Twin Cities, is a historic Black neighborhood here in St. Paul that had traditionally been a neighborhood that really supported a Black middle class that eventually was, like so many Black communities, split in half by a highway. But there's still a lot of love and creativity and beauty in Rondo, and a lot of that has to do with PaviElle French. Actually, we will have one more because here comes Devon. But PaviElle, tell us a little bit about your work.
Hi, y'all. I basically grew up performing in the Rondo neighborhood. I was a child performer, so I was working with like Robert Robinson and those particular choirs, and that's kind of how I got started. I was a theater kid, and I was highly informed and taught and raised up by Penumbra Theater and the people there. So I just kind of had all these different aesthetics of the Black classical artistry, avant-garde, jazz aesthetic, like all these different aesthetics, like raising me up to be who I am. And I try to bring all that through my art, including my neighborhood. So like everything, I'm always mentioning Rondo, I'm always mentioning what it is, my definition of being Black, especially working in the classical industry, which is new for me. I wrote my first symphony last year about my mom and the Rondo community. And that kind of just, it's like a whirlwind now. So now I'm into a whole nother facet of breaking down doors and all these different things, because trying to enter the classical industry as a soul, R&B soul kind of artist, it's a weird thing where people, they disrespect you in different kind of ways, outside of what I've experienced before just working in the artist industry anyway. So that's kind of my new focus, is to work on entering the classical realm with my music, and it being considered Black classical or classical soul or something to that extent, because I am writing that kind of music, and I am trying my best to help evolve that art and that genre in itself. And it doesn't just have to be Mozart and Tchaikovsky and Haydn and all the rest of that. It can also be us. It can also be Isaac Hayes. It could be James Brown. It could be McFadden and Whitehead. It can be, all these different aspects of musical genres added to this genre. So that's my new thing. And then also the other part of my work is I work for the American Institute of Architects, and I am involved in a lot of their equity, diversity, and inclusion work, and am trying to work with the architects, the Black architects of our community, so that they have a major position of power, and that the people have a major position of power with rebuilding their neighborhoods and being a part of that and being the forefront of that and making decisions and stuff. So my work's pretty cut out for me, but everything, it's all tied up in one thing for me. And that's just kind of what I do. I don't know what else to say about my work.
Thanks, PaviElle.
Yeah.
And I just saw that Devon joined us. So Devon is a multi-instrumentalist and composer, also in the Rondo neighborhood. And we've been in sort of these dual orbits around each other for some time. And again, I think through some of the work that ACF is doing, and I've been able to connect with him locally as well. So Devon, why don't you tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing? Yeah.
Good morning, y'all.
Good morning.
I mean, I could cheat and just say what PaviElle just said. Because we, sister from another, we've got that in common. Born and raised in Rondo, born and educated, reared by beautiful Black artists and creators and educators in Rondo. I love that folks at Walker West like to say that I'm one of the cornerstones. They're like, you helped make this place happen. I feel that. And I wouldn't be where I am today without folks like Reverend Carl Walker, Grant West, and Felix James. Those are my mentors. But I've been Black and in classical from day one. So it's a lifelong struggle battle, but I'm here for that work because we need to be seen, we need to be heard. And I'm loving the folks that I'm getting to look at right now, and having Garrett on the team and on the airwaves is just making it seem like we're going by leaps and bounds these days, but we know we've got so much work yet to do. I'm sorry, I'm supposed to talk about myself. I don't know, I make music, so it's artful. Yeah, I don't like swearing, so if I'm working with hip hop people, we have conversations first. There's some words, there's some language, there's some things that we don't do. There's some people that we don't disrespect, especially in our own community. Yeah, good to be with y'all this morning. Happy Juneteenth.
Thanks, Devon. So I think Juneteenth seems to be this hot thing now. So a lot of people, I don't think, know the history of Juneteenth. So I'm just going to spend like a couple of minutes just running down like just the basic history, and then we can get right into the conversation about how you all experience Juneteenth. So Juneteenth is one of the oldest nationally celebrated commemorations of the ending of slavery in the U.S. It goes back to 1865. And it was on June 19th that the Union soldiers led by Major General Gordon Granger landed at Galveston, Texas, with the news that the war had ended and that the enslaved were now free. So this was 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. And so that was January 1st, 1863. And one of the first order of businesses that the general had to do was to read the statement, General Order Number 3. Now I want to possibly dig into this statement a little later because I think there's a lot in here, even in this statement. So the people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of rights. Hear that? Absolute equality of rights. One more time. Absolute equality of rights and right of property between former masters and slaves. And the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. And so the holiday has been celebrated in community for a long time. It's probably a little different everywhere you go, but food has always been a part of it, and that sort of gathering. I think this may not be the case anymore, but initially, because of the restrictions that slaves had around what they could wear, like getting dressed up was a big part of it, because you didn't have that restriction anymore. So it's like, dressing to the nines was a part of that celebration, because you didn't have sort of that restriction on you anymore. But that's really sort of the beginning of Juneteenth and a little bit about the history. I want to really get into the conversation now and really ask our panelists, what has Juneteenth meant to you over time? First of all, did you even celebrate it growing up? Because I know some people didn't, and it wasn't prevalent in some communities. So, what did it mean to you? What's the legacy of the celebration in the Black community to you? We can start with, let's go with Garrett. Garrett, you had a great story today I saw on social media about your family. So I'm just curious about that and that connection.
Sure. So Juneteenth, as an official holiday, even in name, is not something that me and my family grew up celebrating as much as we celebrated and had knowledge of who we are and where we come from. So, I'm very lucky to have a mother who is very much into genealogy and mapping the family tree. So a part of the branding for American Public Media's Juneteenth celebration includes a photo of my family. If you happen to find that, there's a little girl in the photo who is was my great grandmother. I knew her until I was about 5 or 6 years old. Also pictured is her mother, Vivian. And the last link that we have as far as our family tree, my great grandmother, who worked as a slave in North Mississippi, and whose name was America. if for whatever that's worth to you. So something interesting there. So Juneteenth as a holiday is not something that we've celebrated so much as again, it's been a knowledge of who we are and where we come from. Now, with that being said, obviously over the years as I grew up, the word Juneteenth and the holiday of Juneteenth is one that I did become aware of. And I was really happy to, present American Public Media's very first Juneteenth celebration last year. From there, our many client stations this year have taken up the mantle to honor and celebrate Juneteenth. So as frustrating as it can be for this holiday to seem sort of like a hashtag event or something trendy, my silver lining is that I've really been blessed to be able to shed light on this bit of history and hopefully push the needle to actually making this a national holiday that we acknowledge in a real way.
Thanks, Garrett. PaviElle, what about you? Growing up in a community like Rondo, was Juneteenth a big celebration in that community?
We went to Minneapolis for Juneteenth growing up. We went to Theo Worth. Yeah. Went to the north side. Yeah, we went to the north side to go celebrate. And actually we celebrated, we went every year, and my mom and my grandmother were concessionaires there for a couple years. And so they had Z's and Z's concessions, and they were selling fried chicken, and I used to have to plate them and do the little boats and put the bread in there with the chicken and the hot sauce and stuff. And we would do that every year. And then also I was in a band called Poetic Entertainment when I was in my teen years. And so we would go and we would perform, and be with the people and stuff like that, and my cousin Sai, he's a North Sider, Saiolo. So we always would just go back and forth. It'd be like Rondo Days was in St. Paul, and Juneteenth was in Minneapolis, and that's just kind of how we did things. But yeah, we celebrated it, and I grew up with a lot of people who were very conscious. My mom was an educator, and she worked not only for St. Paul Public Schools, but she worked for like Inner City Youth League and Save Selby Area Gardening Enthusiasts. So we would always do these things that were, like we were doing Harambe's back in the day, you know what I mean? And pouring libations for Girl Scouts and doing all kinds of stuff, working with Mother Naima and Sister Raquette and Sahed and Nesret and Mankwe. Like I knew all these people as a kid. So that's how it was brought to me that this is a celebration of who we are, and it should be an American holiday. I mean, it is an American holiday, and it should be celebrated as that, because everything that is Black is American. Like, you know what I mean? So I don't know how else to say that. Yeah. But yeah, it was always a big deal. Like we got our best outfits and we prepped the night before to go out there, just like Rondo Days. Like it was a big deal. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Jannina, you grew up in Detroit. Was it celebrated in Detroit, or what did it look like there? I think you're muted.
I'm muted.
There you go. Sorry. I think we did it.
I never celebrated it growing up. Like I mentioned earlier, right. It was first on my radar because of Leslie Dunner, and we were talking about programming some things around it, which we never got around to. But I guess to me, not having that as part of my family tradition, it's a constant reminder of how much of our history is not common knowledge and is not celebrated and is not taught the way it needs to be. So to me, it's a call not only to celebrate our culture, but to and educate ourselves, but to and for the entire country to embrace that as well as really American history.
Oh, Damien, you're muted.
Kind of sorry about that. I know that we have been talking a little bit about like the idea that it might be a national holiday. We've seen in recent weeks that corporations are joining in the celebration and giving employees days off. And I just want to, I think a couple of you have mentioned the sort of the silver lining in that we do get to expand the knowledge of Blackness in America. But Mankwe, I wonder what you think about this sort of broader celebration, or the idea that this might be a national holiday someday.
Well, first, I just wanted to say, to PaviElle's discussion about Juneteenth in Theodore Wirth Park, that was also how I knew Juneteenth. I didn't grow up with it. My father is East African. My mother is African American from St. Louis. I don't think my family, on my maternal family side, did much celebrating of it in St. Louis. But I, as a young artist, grew into like discovering and it really loving this beautiful, wide open Blackness that would happen at Theodore Wirth Park, just packed, and people just celebrating, and all babies to elders, and the music and the poetry and the people. It was like the best people watching, and I loved being at Juneteenth. So it was a lot of my becoming and my being connected and being part of the Black artist community here in the Twin Cities. Yeah, I think it's a complex thing to be celebrating, because are we free yet? Are we free? So, and it also speaks to the different layers, I guess the pattern of American relationship of the compact that is continually broken between the United States and Black people, and the people who created the wealth on top of the stolen land the land that was stolen, which is that we'll say you're free, but then we actually aren't going to make sure that people know. Or we'll use the word legalistically, we're free, but we'll find all kinds of rules underneath to make sure that you aren't actually free. Or we'll say that you will make the rules that say that you're free, but actually we'll enforce the rules harder on y'all than we'll enforce on anybody else. And we'll say that you're free, but actually we'll make it so that we charge Black and brown people more money for everything, and give you less money to make as wages. Or we'll say that you're free, and then we'll find ways to take the land or make the land inaccessible that you have. So for me, it feels like a symbolic gesture, as well as if we actually know what the history is, kind of a saying like, oh, we're going to celebrate this this false contract, false relationship that we've had, and the ways in which the United States has continued to not honor and come through for Black people and make freedom an actual reality. So to me, it would be to be able to talk about that, and how does that actually still exist in the present time. In some ways, it feels like it's hot right now because there's a desire for things to calm down and quiet down, and maybe these things will make it calm down, and maybe these things will make it things slow down. And I feel like it needs to be an opportunity for us to actually look in detail at how have Black people been treated in all of these different areas. How do these patterns how do these patterns replicate themselves all over the place?
And so one of the things that you mentioned in your opening was this idea about abolition culture, right? And so how do you think that ties in? It sounds like a lot of what you were saying, it seems like abolition culture.
I'm still definitely in a learning journey about this, and I take a lot of my cues on abolition culture from Mariama Kaba, who does work with Transforming Harm, I believe is her organization. And the idea of, and as well as from Angela Davis, with the idea of abolition culture and abolition as something that is generative and something that is about making the culture that we want. We know as beings, as humans, that once we get into, it takes a while to learn how to do something. And once we learn how to do it in a particular way, it takes actually practice to get us out of that groove, to get into something, to do something else. So the default of America is genocide, disappearing of indigenous people, and the abuse and exploitation of Black people and brown people and poor people who we can get away with inside of racial capitalism. So it actually, and that is the water and the air that we grow up in. So it actually is the default that we return to unless we work hard or work well or work spiritually in all these different areas to try to make different patterns happen in how we engage with each other. And though America is very good at marketing itself to the rest of the world and speaking the language of freedom, which is what we can kind of hook onto to try to hold our politicians and our systems and our neighbors to, it is still growing into itself if it has the opportunity and the possibility of becoming what it says it is. And so for me, abolition culture has to do with, and for me, when I say abolition, it's specifically about the prison industrial complex. So it talks about policing, surveillance, courts, and incarceration. And what it is to me is, how do we build a culture where we can be, where we speak about harm that we do to each other, and what does redemption or what does repair look like, and how do we do that without calling into the defaults of somebody else is going to come here and do it for me? Because, and so how do we make safety? By building relationships and practices, cultural practices with each other that doesn't predicate our relationships on the idea that someone is always right and someone is always wrong. And understand that this is an emerging thing. Yeah, so how do we make the patterns of truth and justice between each other? How do we, what does justice, what are the conversations about what justice is look like, and how do they change with generations who are able to see things that we've grown up with and have become the default of the generation before, that the young people are like, you know what, this and this and this and this and this. You say this, but actually this, you were doing all of these things. So how do we make a practice of building better relationships with each other, sturdier relationships with each other, relationships that we can withstand miscommunication and differences in how we view reality that come from differences in class, culture, history, and then our differences as well, because we're each have a particular story and navigate the world through our experiences, both personally, experientially, and ancestrally as well. So it's like, it's almost like I want to build something, help us build together things that is like brushing our teeth, so that we understand that conflict is going to be here forever, and us learning how to navigate it with more respect and desire for more nuanced and greater, more deep and more truthful relationships, so that we can actually face our history and say, oh, we don't want to do it like this anymore. So let's lean into how do we do it differently? And that can start with us and me and my roommate, me and my family, me and my loved ones, me and my neighbors, you know? And how do we understand that it's a togetherness that we are seeking, and not a separation?
Right. Thank you.
Let me just say, I'm just gonna say one more thing. And that is, to me, is where we reduce the need for policing. And because the goal is to make them irrelevant, or to make it not so special that it's one group of people's task all the time. Maybe this is something where we all are in charge of each other's safety, and we all take part in some of the extremes of it during part of our lives, so that we all have stake in the game, both ways, and that we can't say those people, these people, those people, these people anymore.
Great. Wow. PaviElle, I saw you nodding a lot during that.
When Mankwe was talking about, are we really free?
Yeah.
yeah, because I wholeheartedly agree. with that statement, because it's true. It's like, are we really free? You know, and like even when you asked me to do this panel, at first I was just like, I'm not sure, you know what I mean? I'm not sure. Like, I'm processing so much, and there's so many things that are happening post the murder of George Floyd, that have just been, you know, on top of the 400 years of playing like the long game and playing the incremental game, and, you know, moving bit by bit. And I am very emotional right now about all of it, and all the rays of and spectrums of emotion, and just looking for different paradigms and different ways and different understandings of what liberation means, and what it means to me as an individual, what it means for the liberation of my people, and just trying to figure out an understanding right now, because everything is just so much. And then on top of this, it's Juneteenth. On top of this, it's, you know, the 99th anniversary of Black Wall Street. There's so many things that are that are showing me that we are continuously going through these same cycles, these same repetitive cycles. And it's, you know what I mean? Like the cyclical part of it, it's like, can we say that we're the first people that were freed on Juneteenth are? You know what I mean? Can we look back at that and say that we're free, but with no place to go? Or, you know what I mean? Like, so I'm looking at all this stuff, you know what I mean? And what it means to me to be born and raised in a place where I'm connected to my neighborhood, and I'm connected to the peoples that I've come up with and that make my community, but I'm not necessarily connected to the land in my body, in the way that I feel. So there's a lot of things that I'm dealing with right now being an artist, and also just looking at the way that other artists and other ancestors in the past have dealt with these things, and dealt with liberating themselves, and dealt with freedom. I look at like Nina Simone and James Baldwin and Richard Wright and Cindy Bechet and Josephine Baker and all these people that were like entrenched in the struggle, and protest artists and all these different things, and they left here. You know what I mean? And we don't have a lot of conversations about the fact that those people who were so brilliant about interpreting what our struggle was, decided that they were going to liberate themselves in a different way and do something different with their lives in that way too. So like, I'm looking at all of the things I've been researching and looking in the past and going back and really trying to come full circle and make some decisions in my life about being a free woman, being a free Black woman, and really what that means, and how can I help through my liberation and through what decisions that I decide to make to help and inspire my generation and my community or culture to make ways to liberate themselves too, however that looks like, and whatever that looks like, because we got to do everything different. we have to do everything different. We cannot continue to react or respond in the same ways that we did before, because then that's the incremental work. That's them trying to appease us so that we lay back down, or so that we get tired, or so that we stop. You know, and we have to take our freedom, and we have to figure out the ways that we're going to take this, because it's ours to take. It's not anyone's to give. It's not for us to ask for. You know what I mean? That these are our human rights. You know, and even in that, I have a hard time appealing to people and saying, "Oh, I'm a human being." It's like, y'all know that. Y'all know that. Y'all know that we're human beings. And so, you know, it's like all this stuff, you can get so caught up in it. And I don't want to get caught up in it. I want to see everything for the full circle that it is, and then figure out what direction freedom is, you know?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the long game, and I'm thinking about what Devon was saying, that he's been a lifelong classical black man in classical music, and it seems like in some ways that that's a long game to be playing. Devon, what, and I might actually go to Jannina and Garrett about this too. Like, what is this idea of maybe liberation? And that's one thing that I would like to say. I think we do a lot of work, a lot of talking about equity, and equity seems sort of a passive thing, and we're asking, like PaviElle said, we're asking for something. Whereas I think liberation is something about self. Again, like what PaviElle was saying, we can take our liberation. Equity seems to be kind of that long game. But Devon, I wonder if you could speak to sort of your experience and maybe what even liberation, Black liberation means in classical music.
Black liberation in classical music. That sounds like it sounds like a dream. It sounds like something I've dreamt about, thought about, but I can't actually see it. I can't feel it. I don't know what it would actually look like, but I want to be here for it. So that to me just means that I have to be here and do my challenging work and hope that the incremental is happening. It's hard to see it when you're in it. But composers, we often get that perspective of getting to step outside of a thing, trying to come at a subject matter from the macro as opposed to the micro. So my default these days is to try to do that, to step away. And again, you talked about, or probably talked about the artists and the heroes of ours who had to step away. Again, I feel like I'm at that place in my life where all the years of struggle and fighting and conversation and inaction have weighed on me, and I'm just starting to feel so heavy. And a way to get towards some lightness seems to be to find escapes. I mean, I love the word retreat, and it seems necessary for the art to happen. And other places on the earth I've been feel far freer than the place I was born. And again, like I said, I can't see it. I don't feel more free today than I was 20 years ago. And I can't say that I can't imagine that I'm gonna feel more free a year from now. The phrase, "I can't breathe," resonates so deeply with me because I'm a woodwind player. And over the last couple of years, I've realized that I have lost the full range of my lungs. Like, I just don't get deep breaths anymore. I feel a constriction around me all the time. And the time I am most free is when I'm in the music, in the art, sharing, communicating the truths and the freedoms that I've been able to capture for myself, or that I've been gifted through connection with ancestors through this work. I don't know. I have no answers. I just have questions and concerns and comments.
No, that's it. Gary, what about you? What does it look like to you?
Black liberation in classical music is not going to start until we understand fully what happened to us. So our music education, those of us who identify as so-called classical musicians, our music education was an assimilation. We really have to understand that. The way we learned how to play our instruments, the way we learned what intonation was, what voice leading is, everything that we learned about our artistry was brought to us under the purview of whiteness. Okay, that's what we have to really understand first to get an idea of what liberation, Black liberation in classical music is going to look like. And to be quite frank, that expands far beyond our music educations. Our educations in general were practices and exercises in assimilation. We were taught the Revolutionary War, but many of us were not taught the name Crispus Attucks. We were taught how valiant Susan B. Anthony fought for gender equity, but we aren't taught that she would rather cut off her right arm than fight for voting rights for the Negro. That's a quote. Look that up. We're taught that Martin Luther King Jr. had a dream, but we're not taught that he saw his biggest oppressor as the white moderate. He hated the white moderate more than he hated the KKK. Read his letter from Birmingham jail as it applies today. We were taught to celebrate an independence in July that our ancestors did not get to celebrate in lieu of learning about Juneteenth. So, to loop that back around to Black liberation and classical music, we really have to wrap our minds around the fact that we were from the very beginning assimilated and conditioned. Once we break our oral definitions of that art form, even the way we use the way we use the phrase classical music, that's when the process will begin. But until we really understand the levels of systemic racism, how deep it runs, and how ubiquitous it is to every part of this culture, there will be no liberation. We have to shed ourselves of the fear of saying no to whiteness everywhere we see it.
Thanks, Garrett. Jannina, if I recall, the show that you presented during Sphinx Conference at the Institute of Art was a very diverse. You presented a very diverse program that day. I think all of the composers were brown and Black, except for maybe one, and all of them. So I wonder, to you, and then also just thinking about what PaviElle and Devon said about bringing different aspects or different aspects of our culture musically into classical music. What maybe Black liberation and classical music means to you.
One day I'm going to get used to this. I think the revolution is happening already. And it's happening in the Black community. It's not happening on the traditional stages. It's not happening in the institutions. And the institutions are talking, but it's not, the revolution is coming from Black people and Black musicians. And that also, I mean, classical music in America to me means a lot more than the Western idea of classical music. It means pretty much every genre of American music that there is that came from Black music. I mean, the violin itself is an African instrument. And so, like Garrett said, the history is so incredibly important and inspiring. That program I curated in Detroit, if you remember, every piece was stylistically so different and spanning many, many decades. And pieces that you're not going to find programmed onto traditional programming, but if you hear them on their own, you would ask yourself, why not? So I think this month, especially as Black Lives Matter is trending, and every classical organization is putting out some sort of statement to pledge their allegiance to whatever they're pledging. Think about all the people I know who are doing the work and have been doing the work, and they're brilliant artists, and that's what I've been saying, to people who are coming to me asking about Black composers, and I'm telling them, don't just program a Black composer. You're going to program a Black composer. Become an advocate for that composer in the same way that you are an advocate for anything that you studied from the time you were a little kid and learned every nuance of how to play through conservatory. Become an advocate that way. And that goes deeper than learning the notes. That might mean learning jazz or blues and different harmonies and different scales, or reading a book about the composer's life, or really familiarizing yourself with the time period to become a true advocate for that composer. But the other thing I'll say as far as liberation, there are so many Black musicians. They're everywhere, and every institution is just crying from the rooftops that they just can't find them. And as you see these organizations, I think of Castle of Our Skins, I think of String Candy, I think of Chineke, I think of Sphinx, Virtuosi. As you see these organizations that you go, and they're playing not only at a top level, but they're doing something actually interesting and creative in classical music, which you can be hard pressed to find in any programming these days. I think that's the future. And I think everybody who started an organization like that, Chi-Chi started Chineke because she was so tired of having these conversations where people told her the musicians didn't exist. And that's part of breaking into the liberation. That narrative that the talent isn't there, that the players aren't there, that the music doesn't exist. It's fighting against that. And I think, so back to my point, the revolution is coming from our own communities, and it will be so great that all of those institutions are just going to want to jump on board, because it's doing something that's saying something and resonating with people in a way that, to be quite frank, our classical institutions are just struggling to do.
And if I may quickly add to something that she said. So Jannina said that the revolution is happening, and a lot of people doubt that reality, but I agree that the revolution is happening. When I saw the police run from the 3rd precinct in Minneapolis as it burned down, that reminded me of Nat Turner and his crew taking over their overseers, because that's what the police are in 2020. They're the modern day overseers on this plantation. When I see folks, Black folks with platforms who are telling the truth, I see the revolution. When I get all of those angry emails every Christmas on my national platform, I tell all of those white people, you are complicit in racism every time you listen to Handel's Messiah. That is something that I feel is revolutionary. The revolution is here, but we can't let it trickle out. The fire is burning. We have to make sure that we keep the fire going.
So that's what I was hoping that someone would say, because again, we've seen it time and time again. After every sort of period where there's, although I don't know if it ever subsides, but George Floyd and Tiana and all of those folks has kind of created all this energy now, and it seems like Juneteenth is the beneficiary and symbolically of all of that energy. And so I think, and if you have any questions, you can feel free to put them into the chat box. But I want to know how we keep this energy going, and realizing that it's not necessarily about us in this. How do we make sure, or how the folks in this room that aren't Black folks making sure that this momentum keeps up, and it's not another sort of ebb and flow situation where there's this tide and then it goes away until the next time. How is that going to happen? How is this energy going to keep going in this moment?
I just want to say, circle back around to something that PaviElle said as well, that there's a big part of our liberation that comes from within us. So for us to liberate ourselves inside, and a lot of the ways that Black musicians have done that is just to make the music that we hear in our souls, and to be able to, and for me, in terms of music coming from and being part of a creative music field and community, through the AACM, the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians, and all of the musicians here, the musicians who call themselves just musicians. But for us to be able to have the agency and the independence to have the power to make our own decisions or make our own worlds, make our own lives happen. And and for the world to be able to match that liberation that comes from inside us with the desire and an appreciation for Black people. So it's not, I don't feel like liberation is solely other people's responsibility, because we have to feel liberated inside of us, because there's so much of many ways that we, as Garrett has talked about, we have been forced to assimilate or to do something, make ourselves smaller in order to survive this. That I want the biggest, most bountiful, like, resilience and beauty and joy to be able to come from us, so that our creativity is unmatched, unbowed, and can't be questioned, and for the world to desire us, because it's also Black people around the world who are also revolting with us and transforming with us, because this anti-Blackness is all over the world. And so I want a world that desires our babies and grandbabies, but for us to first to desire ourselves and our history, and to go back again, that Blackness is everywhere. Everything that is America is Black, and in really a lot of the world, most of the world is Black at its core. So, or African, at least at its core.
Someone mentioned Nina Simone earlier. You know, Nina Simone famously defined freedom as no fear. And it's that sense of courage that we have to have. It takes a lot of courage to stand up against that employer. It takes a lot of courage to stand up against the police. The police does not pull me over without an argument. I'm not obedient to them. We have to stop being obedient, and we have to have the courage, as Mankwe said, to desire ourselves, as that applies to the world of so-called classical music. We aren't desiring ourselves if we allow a program that does not include any whiteness to exist. And I'm talking about if you're a musician or in the audience. We have to have the courage to stand up to what has happened for so long, as that question applies to our non-Black brothers and sisters. My quick answer is always start with Mimo. I'm sure there's someone in your family who says something problematic on a regular basis, and you sit there and say nothing about it. That's where all of this is going to start. To circle back around, Nina Simone, no fear. Have the courage to really actually be an anti-racist.
Thank you. And we are at 12:30. I actually think that was a really good way to end with that challenge of having no fear and being courageous, and being anti-racist. So ACF does have a book club, and we've been doing it for quite some time, but now it's obviously opened up, since most everything is virtual these days. And I'm going to pull up the next one here. It is going to be on the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And I think, first of all, people should read that book. And you should come and attend our book club, and be a part of that discussion on the book. Here it is. But I would really like to thank the panel for being here and having this discussion. Let's see. I do have one question, even though we're at time. So let's see. Do you think there's any merit to the divorce the art from the artist argument that is often presented, e.g., Wagner being performed in Israel?
Listen to me. If I raped your mother, if I killed your brother, if I burned down your house, would you want anything to do with any of my music? I think that's a gray area that we only allow for these white men, these old dead white men. That is a level of equity, if I may use that word, that is not afforded to us. So that's my answer to that. We can absolutely, because I'm sure no one here is listening to R. Kelly anymore, right? Or at least I hope not. You know, I think the same thing applies. We need to think about what the implications are, again, of being complicit. And if there's anything questionable about Wagner, there are thousands of other artists and composers whose music we can consume.
And that speaks to the point of what Mankwe was saying, basically by going, to the source and understanding like what it is and what it comes from. And Garrett was saying, you got to understand what these things come from and what are these memes and mores and things that were carried through. People sell DNA. Like, these things are passed down. These are things that are in the fabric of our society, in each little piece of fabric in every facet of our lives, and not just music, but everything, theater, anything that's deemed entertainment, anything that is life, even the way in which that our neighborhoods are set up, even in the way that we are redlined and gentrified. All these things are from the very first peoples that did these things. You know what I mean? So it's not everything that happened then is now.
And then you know what I mean? And if we want to talk about defunding, you think about what you're supporting and where your resources are going. Do you want your resources to be going to this, or do we need to defund all of these things and fund actually what's going to make safety, what's going to make beauty, what's going to make positivity and nourishment for the future? We can continue to put our energy into the old tropes that have excluded so many people, or we can actually make a way to the future.
And actually address our complicity. If you have a TikTok, if you have a TikTok account, you're contributing to the re-election of Donald Trump. We have to really pay attention to every single way we use our dollar and our emotional labor, the sweat of who we are. We have to pay so much more attention to that.
And which goes to America's complicity in terms of the militarization of the world. And so there's ways that the defunding the police, that we're talking about the world as well. We can't just stop with the United States.
Absolutely. And we as Black people have to set boundaries for what it is that we do as well. Is like those of us that are artists and people that speak out and people that have platforms, we even have to have boundaries for the things that we focus on, for the things that we talk about, how we're, tokenized or used in these systems, or called, or we're the first call for white stations or for whatever. Like, we have to set these boundaries. Like, this I did because Damien asked me to do it, and my brothers and sisters that I know are on this panel, and I feel comfortable enough to do that. Whereas I'm not going to any other place that's all white folks that want me to speak and make people feel okay about what's going on, or give them a kind word because I come from a place of light. That's not what we're talking about right now. This is life or death. This is real. This is here and now. You know what I mean? And like I said earlier, we have to stop asking. And in that, how we do this, how we set the precedent, is it matters tremendously, because this is our freedom. And this is our time.
The run on the bank has already been made. All the calls, all the people that have checked in and wanted to make themselves feel better by reaching out to me. I reached my limit, and I'm done with that work. I'm not here for that.
No.
So we do need to protect ourselves and to understand that we need to save some for self so we can do the work.
Yes.
And with that being said, I also recognize that it's a very nuanced and multi-fronted battle. So I go into those all-white rooms. I don't mind doing that because I don't mind making people uncomfortable. It goes back to that issue, that concept of courage, having no fear.
Look, I could talk here all day. I mean, this could keep going. I have really enjoyed this conversation, and really thank you, panelists, again, knowing that this is work as well, for giving us your outlook and your opinions, giving us something to think about. And I really hope that those of you who were on the panel and joined us really got something out of this, and we'll take this into the work that you're doing out there, and really hopefully this will inspire you to live an anti-racist life, and hopefully for us we can find that self-liberation that we so desperately need at this time in 2020. Thank you so much, Garrett, PaviElle, Jannina, Devon, Mankwe. I got everybody right. I want to do this again, so I might give y'all a call again to do another talk. But thank you again, and please take time for yourself in this moment too, and we'll see you the next time. Bye, everyone.